What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Let's Talk MMA podcast. Hope you guys have an amazing one. Belal Muhammad has been talking about being like Alex Pereira, fighting again this year to defend his belt in December because he believes that Conor McGregor is not going to fight this year. So he wants to jump in on that December card and just like Pereira, be another active champion. This is what we want, man. Alex Pereira is bringing a standard for champions to fight more often to defend their belts. And if Belal Muhammad does fight in December, after Volkanovski, Adesanya, and Usman all lost their belts, it looked like a lot of the champions are not going to fight that often. With Alex Pereira actually fighting every few months, it seems like. He already defended his belt 3 times this year. 3 times since April, which is crazy. It looks like a lot of the other champions want to also defend their belts more often. And that's great for the sport. It gets the divisions rolling. And Belal should absolutely fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, he has been talking about fighting either Shavkat or Usman. The only reason he's bringing up Usman is because it's the bigger money fight. It's the legendary fighter. It looks better on his fighting career if he beats Usman compared to Shavkat, who's the up-and-coming contender. He's not as established as Usman is, and he's a more dangerous fighter in his prime, whereas Usman is past his prime at this point. And even Shavkat talked about it. He said he doesn't know why Kamaru Usman is even brought up for a title defense, because he's 0-3, whereas for Shavkat, he's 18-0, 100% finish rate. It is kind of similar to the whole John Jones thing. You know, John Jones wanting to fight Stipe rather than Tom Aspinall. That's like Belal wanting to fight maybe Usman rather than Shavkat. It's not as drastic as that, right? Because Stipe is 42 years old, way past his prime, not fighting that often. Usman is still very competitive. He's not as old as Stipe is, but it's like a similar kind of dynamic. And hopefully Belal goes up against either Shavkat or Jack Della Maddalena over someone like Kamaru Usman, who should get a win, right? He needs at least a win to get a title shot, I think. And Kamaru Usman's down for that. He's down to fight any contender. And speaking of Alex Pereira, Dana talked about why Magomed Ankalaev did not get the title shot, and it's because he took another fight against Alexander Rakic. So according to Dana, it seems like if Ankalaev did not want to fight Rakic, if he actually waited out for a title shot, he would have gotten it, which is kind of interesting because usually fighters are told to take every opportunity they get. Whatever fight comes their way, they should accept that fight, get in there in the cage, win the fight, and then maybe they get a title shot later or something like that, right? But it looks like for Ankalaev, if he actually waited out, if he sat on his ranking a bit, just a little bit longer, he wouldn't have gotten that title shot against Alex Pereira, which is crazy. And Alex Pereira even talked about, he said he thought he was going to fight Ankalaev. He told the UFC, according to him, he said he told the UFC that he wants to fight Ankalaev. So he was very surprised why they gave him Khalil Roundtree. He says he understands why Ankalaev didn't get the title shot because he believes that Ankalaev declined the title shot, whether it's because of location, where he wants to fight in Abu Dhabi or the Middle East or something like that. I know Ankalaev has said that before, that he would like to fight Alex Pereira in the Middle East. But the thing about that is he fought in Nevada in his last fight against Johnny Walker. So both of them have their fights. Both of them are going to compete 1 month away from each other. So if they both win, then we're probably going to see Pereira versus Ankalaev. And Khalil Roundtree also talked about that he's not going to wrestle with Pereira. He doesn't want to take the fight to the ground. He's going to strike with him, prove that he is the better striker. And I think that kind of confidence from Khalil Roundtree is coming from his win against Gokhan Saki, who is a veteran in kickboxing, right? He knocked him out in the first round. So that win against Gokhan Saki, I think, is fueling his confidence in striking with Alex Pereira. But he's probably going to get knocked out. Now, Khalil Roundtree is not a grappler. He's always been a striker. But he's been training in MMA for a long time, longer than Pereira has. At this level of the game, every fighter should be able to grapple at some level. Khalil Roundtree should be able to shoot a takedown or at least mix it up to not make it very one-dimensional, right? Don't make it a kickboxing match with Pereira because he's going to beat you 100% of the time if you're not someone like Adesanya who has that kickboxing experience as well. And also the experience of fighting Alex Pereira multiple times. Well, I don't want to say 100% because Roundtree could knock him out, right? It is a fight at the end of the day, but Khalil Roundtree's best chances of beating Pereira is to mix up the game a little bit, shoot takedowns, mask it up with his boxing, throw good kicks, all that sort of stuff. Don't make it just a kickboxing match with Alex Pereira. I mean, look what's happened to all of the other light heavyweight opponents for Pereira. Jamal Hill, Yuri Prohaska, even Sean Strickland when he fought middleweight. These guys decided not to wrestle with Pereira, and they got knocked out for it. Even though none of them are pure grapplers, they're more strikers, but they do have that wrestling aspect over Pereira. This guy hasn't been wrestling that long. The only light heavyweight that actually didn't get knocked out was Jan Blachowicz because he wrestled. He gassed Pereira out enough where he could take the punches because strikers have a different kind of cardio, right? They have different muscle memory. So grappling with them is actually going to tire them out more than striking with them. Pereira is going to get a lot more tired if you wrestle with him than if you strike with him. And that's what makes Jan Blachowicz an actual good light heavyweight. And that's another reason why a lot of people want to see Ankalaev fight Pereira, not because he is a contender who's beaten some decent opponents, I guess, and he has a unbeaten streak and all that stuff, but the main thing is he's a guy that can wrestle. He's a guy that can strike as well, and he probably will fight Pereira in an MMA style fight. But the crazy thing about that is Ankalaev also talked about how he's not going to take the fight to the ground. He is going to stand up with Pereira too. So Pereira's really having a field day at light heavyweight. But I don't think Ankalaev beats Pereira either. I think Pereira would beat pretty much every light heavyweight, and that includes guys like Nikita Krylov who can wrestle too. Right, the three fighters I think that could beat Pereira are Jan Blachowicz, Magomed Ankalaev, and Nikita Krylov. These are the toughest fights for Alex Pereira. He already beat one of them in a split decision, very close fight. It'd be great to see him fight again. I think we're going to see the Ankalaev fight probably next year, maybe in the spring, and I don't see him fighting Nikita Krylov. I think Krylov will lose to guys like maybe Jamal Hill or Yuri Prohaska before he fights Alex Pereira. But the thing about Pereira is he's talking about going back down to 185. He says that he wants to go and fight Dricus Du Plessis for the middleweight title. I mean, I don't think he should, and as Robert Whittaker said as well, Pereira should not lose weight to go to 185 again. He committed to light heavyweight. He's cutting the weight multiple times for that weight class. His body is naturally optimal for that weight class. So why would he cut weight back down to 185? He probably would lose to Dricus Du Plessis. His chin wasn't as good. He didn't seem as strong, and he's only getting older, where that weight cut would be so much harder for him to make. I think he should stay at light heavyweight and maybe only move up to heavyweight if he gets another title defense or two. So I agree with Robert Whittaker. And speaking of Whittaker, I cannot wait for his fight with Hamza Chimaev, man. It's such a big fight for him. It's a big fight for Hamzat. Hopefully Hamza can stay healthy and finally get into the cage with Whittaker so we can all finally see if Hamza is going to be that dominant force at 185. I think Whittaker's going to be a very tough fight for Hamza, especially for 5 rounds. And it's crazy because we don't look at Whittaker as some legendary fighter, but in the middleweight division, he is one of the most legendary fighters we've ever seen there. Whittaker has been a top 10 fighter for nearly 10 years. Do you know how crazy that is? Since 2015, Whittaker has been a top 10 fighter and still is currently. The only other fighter that was longer in the top 10 was Anderson Silva. Anderson was top 10 for about 11 years, from 2006 to 2017. Whittaker is probably the second most relevant fighter in middleweight history. He was the former champion. He beat fighters like Yoel Romero, Paulo Costa, Jared Cannonier, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, Jacare Souza, arguably beat Israel Adesanya, consistently top 3, been top 10 for 9 years. I mean, he is the second most relevant fighter in middleweight history, in my opinion. And he's still good. He's still one of the best middleweights in the world. That's the most insane thing about it. Usually fighters, 9 years into the top 10, either retire, they're not the same fighter anymore, or the competition just passes him up. Whittaker is still fighting strong, man. It's crazy. The other middleweights that come to mind for being the most relevant are Michael Bisping, who was also in the top 10 rankings for about 9 years. He was also former champion, beat some good guys, stuff like that. So him and Whittaker are somewhat equivalent in relevancy. You also have Israel Adesanya, who is in the top 10 for about 6 years, and Derek Brunson, oddly enough, who is top 10 for 7 years. He's like the ultimate gatekeeper of middleweight history. It used to be Michael Bisping, but Bisping eventually got better. He won the belt. He beat Luke Rockhold, defended the belt as well against Dan Henderson, which, a lot of people still think that Henderson won the fight. And I think he would have became the oldest champion in history if he beat Bisping. That win could have went to Dan Henderson, but Bisping defended the title. He exceeded the gatekeeper status, which is actually not bad for a fighter to be a gatekeeper. It just means that you have to beat that fighter in order to fight the top echelon of the weight class. And Derek Brunson is that fighter for middleweight. In other news, we did have some fights on the Contender series, which have been very fun lately. There was the one guy that beat Renan Ferreira, who's fighting Francis Ngannou next. The one Russian fighter. Well, it was a decision loss, but then turned into a no contest because Rizvan Kuniev tested positive for multiple steroids. He's a very big guy. Landed a big knee on his opponent on the Contender series. Threw an elbow. The guy dropped. Finished him off with ground and pound. But that's going to be an interesting fighter for the heavyweight division. But when you look at his body in the PFL versus the Contender series, there's a very big difference. He looked pretty solid in shape in the PFL, but in the Contender series, where he didn't test positive for steroids, he looked a bit blobbish. Actually, very blobbish, but maybe he is actually good, right? It's going to put into context if Renan Ferreira beats Francis Ngannou in terms of how good this guy might be, Rizvan. But then again, Ngannou might be close to retirement. He's made so much money. He's done so much for the sport. He's, won the UFC title. defended it, beat Stipe, beat Cyril Gane, beat some amazing fighters even before that, fought in boxing, made tens of millions of dollars there, but he does have that motivation about the whole thing with his son, which I hope he wins for, that's a very, very big thing for him. Very sad. I hope he succeeds, man. But the Contender Series has been really fun. We also have Lonnie Kavanaugh from Cage Warriors. He looked amazing, knocking out Antoine Ho in the first round with that left hook. He was like fainting with the lead hand constantly, and that got Ho to react with a parry, so he tried to parry a jab. This happened a couple times, and then Lonnie Kavanaugh found the opening for the left hook around that. Antoine Ho did not see the punch at all, got KO'd for a long time. He was out cold for minutes. It was crazy. But both of those fighters should be in the UFC, in my opinion, in terms of like skills and stuff. Like, even though Antoine Ho got knocked out in the first round, he beats some of the ranked flyweights. He does. He's that good. Like, can you imagine Antoine Ho versus Matt Schnell? He would destroy Matt Schnell in a fight. But I do think Lonnie Kavanaugh might become a future title challenger, if not even a champion. That guy's very, very good, man. Amazing boxing, well-rounded, great footwork, good kicks, one-punch knockout power for a flyweight. And interestingly, Sean O'Malley's been talking about the whole Sphere card and how his fight is not getting as much promotion. He said all the promotion is on the Sphere and it's not on his fight with Merab, which I never really thought about it that way, but he is kind of right. The main thing we hear about that event is about the Sphere, that whole dynamic, not the fight itself, which O'Malley versus Merab is a very big fight. It's competitive. Both guys can win it. It's a fun fight. O'Malley has the knockout power. He has the knockout precision. Merab has the pace and the cardio and just the wrestling to completely dominate that fight. You also do have the Grasso and Shevchenko rivalry, but most of what we're hearing about is the Sphere. And O'Malley's not too happy about that. He said that he is the guy fighting. He wants more promotion for his fight. And he is the main eventer. He's the guy who's essentially putting on the event himself in a way, right? He's the champion in the main event. And it's kind of interesting because O'Malley's been the fighter that they have been promoting before. They were pushing him so much. And now all of a sudden with the Sphere, there's not as much talk about O'Malley. Now the Sphere dynamic is probably going to be cool, right? It's going to be different. It's going to be expensive. But at the end of the day, MMA fans want to watch fights. The Sphere is a side effect of it. It's like an appetizer. If O'Malley and Merab are not the main event, if he has some like boring main event instead of that, people won't care about the Sphere. But they will care about the Sphere if guys like O'Malley and Merab are fighting, right? So at the end of the day, the fans don't care about the Sphere as long as you got good fights. If you have good fights, then people are going to find the Sphere thing pretty fun. But how expensive are those tickets? What are the ticket prices for ringside and stuff? Let me see here. Oh, wow. It's pretty much an arm and a leg to watch the fights at the arena. What? Did the prices for the seats go down? Because I see an article from August 8th that says that the lowest ticket prices are $1,090. But here now, when I'm actually looking on Vivid Seats, there are some seats that are $732. Is that like to sit outside the arena? For $732, you get to watch from the sidewalk. No, that's row 25, section 102. I don't know. Wait, that's actually pretty close. Why are the close seats so much cheaper? But then on the most expensive seat is $43,000, 758 cents, according to Vivid Seats. It's most likely going to get sold out, though. And John Jones has responded to the fans about him not fighting Tom Aspinall. And he went and called Tom Aspinall a random. He said, why would he fight a random? I don't know if he actually believes Tom Aspinall is just some random fighter. He's the interim champion who just defended the belt before even Jones did at heavyweight. He's already beaten very good fighters. He might just be like playing with the fans on that. There's no way he thinks that Tom Aspinall is a nobody. Because potentially, Tom Aspinall could become one of the best heavyweights we've ever seen. He already has some skills that show that he could be, right? He has amazing boxing, he has good wrestling, very good on the ground, great submissions, some of the best footwork we've ever seen in the heavyweight division, and he's faster than pretty much all of them while also having one-punch knockout power. He's one of the few heavyweights that L-steps. That alone gives him such a big advantage over most of his opponents, and he's only 2 title defenses away from tying the record for most title defenses in heavyweight history, which both Stipe and Fedor currently have. Only 2 more title defenses. He just has to win 2 more times. And the only tough fight for him now is John Jones. If it's not John Jones, right? If Jones decides not to fight Tom Aspinall, this nobody interim champion, according to Jones, can become one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And Jones missed out on fighting him and rather fought Stipe, who's 42 years old, hasn't fought in 3.5 years, coming off a knockout loss. Fedor Emelianenko has a more recent win than Stipe does. Stipe's last win was August of 2020 when he beat Daniel Cormier. Fedor's last win was October of 2021 when he beat Timothy Johnson. The last time Stipe had a win, Tom Aspinall only had one fight in the UFC. He only had his debut. And since that had 8 fights, won the interim championship, defended the belt too. That's not even a dig on Stipe, who's amazing. He's just taking the fight that they're giving him, but it's to put into context on who Jones' opponent is and where he's at in his career. Right? Stipe's not in his prime. He's not at his best. He hasn't fought in such a long time. And do you know how crazy it would look if Jones never fought him? If Jones retired without ever fighting Aspinall, knowing that he was the undisputed champion and decided to fight Stipe instead, and Tom Aspinall became like the greatest heavyweight of all time. Imagine the fans looking back in that era. Jones's reputation as a fighter would be completely under question for ducking Tom Aspinall like that. Because in Jones's mind, he's kind of like, I don't want to say he's hoping that Tom Aspinall's not going to be great, but that's what it seems like he thinks. He thinks that Tom Aspinall is not one of the best or the greatest heavyweights or something like that. But if he becomes the greatest heavyweight of all time, that whole era will look very bad on John Jones's fighting resume. And then let's go to the questions. And we're going to start with John Jordan. Dricus' style has drawn criticism as being unorthodox, if not downright amateurish. It reminds me of how Tony used to fight. We knew he didn't always use proper form in training or fighting, but it worked for him. Until it didn't. My question is, do you see Dricus' awkward style getting figured out and then it becoming very beatable once that blueprint is found? Or will it take more of a decline in his athleticism and durability to make him vulnerable? Like Tony, Dricus seems to have a style that is going to work very well until it doesn't, and I'm not sure if he'll be able to adapt. Keep up the great work. It was awesome to hear you on the last countdown. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, I was on 305 countdown, which is actually crazy, It really wasn't much, but it's cool to be on those. But yeah, Dricus and Tony Ferguson are very similar in the fact that they are extremely unorthodox, and the techniques they use in a fight aren't techniques that most coaches would teach them, right? It's kind of stuff that they come up with on their own maybe, but then it's weird because Dricus' coach tases them for not using good form in their technique. How many times did Dricus get tased? Because when you watch the way that he fights, I don't know if his coaches want him to throw punches that way or fight the way that he does. But the difference between Dricus and Tony is that Dricus is a lot more physical than Tony was. Tony was very athletic. He had a very good chin. He had an incredibly long reach and huge hands. Whenever he would punch someone, it just bust them up very easily. But he wasn't as strong or as powerful as Dricus is. Dricus is kind of like a Looney Tunes character. He's just way too powerful and finds a way to win a fight every single time. So where Tony Ferguson eventually lost to Justin Gaethje, I think that's going to be different than when Dricus loses. I think Dricus is so durable, so strong, so powerful that his athleticism would have to decline before he loses. But then again, it's a fight at the end of the day, so maybe he gets caught and knocked out at some point, even when he's in his physical prime. But that's what I think about Dricus Du Plessis' abilities versus Tony Ferguson's. They would have Kamikaze. Hi Weasel, you're an absolute legend. Of course, not as legendary as the pound-for-pound #1 John Jones. Do you know what happens if any other person walks into a room with John Bones Jones? No, I'm kidding. I don't know much about MMA agencies and agents, so here's my question. As a fighter, your skills and regional performance are important. However, if you don't have the right manager, agency, network, your chances of being signed in the UFC, PFL, or ONE are diminished. Meaning to get signed, you need to give a bigger portion of your purse to the sharks of the game. Do you think this is a problem, and how can you avoid it or solve it? Especially the fighter pay issue, and those agencies work on higher commission because they have the access. It seems like any top talent fighter comes from Ali, Malikawa, Soares, etc. It's been part of the fight game for a long time, not just MMA, but even boxing with the managers and stuff. And guys like Ali, they have so many fighters under them that clientele shows to other fighters that they are trustworthy or safe to be with them to get the best deals. So I don't think it's really going to change. I don't think the manager, agency, network aspect of fighting is going to change really because fighters don't want to do that themselves. They just want to focus on fighting, most of them at least. You have guys like Sean O'Malley who will do some of the negotiations himself, but most fighters, they're not as business-minded as they are just athletes or fighters, so they hire agencies or managers for that. I think with the Muhammad Ali, I watched an old video of yours talking about Tony Ferguson and where he ranks of all time, and you said he was one of the greatest to ever do it. There are only the all-time great champions you could really put above him. Now due to his massive losing streak, I feel like no one looks at him that way anymore. If Tony retired after his loss to Justin or Charles Charles, do you think Tony would have the career to be considered one of the greatest fighters ever? Just interesting to me because I feel like everyone knows the Tony we see in this losing streak just isn't the same guy who had that 12-win streak. And prime career versus prime career, do you still view Tony Ferguson's 12-win streak as one of the greatest runs in the sport? Yeah, a long time ago, I thought Tony was one of the best in the sport. He was one of the best fighters. I don't agree with that anymore, even when I look back at his 12-win streak. Again, a long time ago, Tony had different kind of aura back then, and a lot of people, as myself, viewed him very, very highly because even though he had like unorthodox technique, he was still winning fights. It's kind of how a lot of people view Dricus Du Plessis today. And the performance against RDA for Tony Ferguson is still one of the greatest performances, if not the greatest performance of his entire career. He beat one of the best lightweights in his prime, essentially. RDA does say that he was cutting way too much weight when he fought Tony and all that stuff, which was understandable, but that was an RDA who just lost the belt, was looking amazing at lightweight, even beating Eddie Alvarez before he got caught by the right hook. And that's the guy that Tony Ferguson completely outpaced and beat up for 5 rounds, or nearly 5 rounds. I think the first round was very competitive, and then Tony just started to take over from the 3rd round to the 5th round of that fight. But no, even when I look at Tony's 12-win streak, I don't think he's one of the greatest fighters of all time or anything like that. He had very, very good wins, but do I see his 12-win streak greater than like Jose Aldo's streak, or John Jones's, or George St. Pierre's, Anderson Silva's? I don't think I hold his win streak as high as those guys, but for any non-undisputed champion, he has one of the best runs in the UFC. But there was a point in Tony Ferguson's career where I did think that he was the best lightweight in the world. Back in 2015, I think Tony was probably the best lightweight, even including Khabib, because I think around the time when Khabib beat Edson Barboza, I think Tony would have beaten him if they fought each other. That was the only time I think Tony would have beaten him. But Khabib, after that layoff, got better. He got way better. When he came back in 2016, I think Khabib at that point became the best lightweight before he ever became champion, even better than Tony Ferguson. But in 2015, 2014-ish, I think Tony Ferguson was the best. He was like ranked number 5 at the time or something. I think with a Troy Hartung. First question, is Dricus currently the most well-rounded champion in the UFC right behind Islam? His fighting IQ is super high, and both his stand-up and ground game are extremely effective both offensively and defensively. No, I don't think Dricus is the most well-rounded champion behind Islam. I think Topuria is more well-rounded, and he's roughly similar to Belal Muhammad in terms of well-roundedness. Like being able to wrestle, being able to grapple, box, kick, footwork, all this sort of stuff. Him and Belal are probably like 3rd or 4th. Maybe Dricus is a little bit above him in terms of well-roundedness, but I think Topuria is probably 2nd behind Islam. The only thing about Topuria is he doesn't kick that much, right? But his footwork is much better than Dricus is, much better than Belal's. His boxing is just one of the best in the UFC. He has great wrestling. I think he's better on the ground than those guys. He's more flexible with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's a lot more variety there. So I would say that Islam is the most well-rounded, then Topuria, then Dricus, then Belal, then maybe John Jones, then Tom Aspinall, then O'Malley, Pantoja, then Pereira. Second question, if Izzy returns soon, which would be the wiser choice for him? Fighting Jack Hermanson or fighting the winner of Brendan Allen versus Imavov? And how do each of the 3 potential fights for Izzy go down in your opinion? Do any of them pose big threats to Izzy? I think Hermanson's wrestling can give Izzy a bit of a problem in the first couple rounds, but I think his patterns are obvious to Izzy. I think Izzy will be able to stuff the takedowns eventually, completely outstrike Hermanson, whose footwork is very obvious for Izzy to counter, in my opinion. For Brendan Allen, though, he's got more dangerous striking than Hermanson does. He has a very good submission game. I wouldn't be surprised if Brendan Allen beat Izzy, honestly. He is well-rounded enough to mix up the striking and the grappling and win like that, but Izzy has the experience. He has way better footwork. He's very long. Brendan Allen doesn't have great footwork compared to Izzy's. That's the one big thing for Brendan Allen there. If he can get better with his foot placements, where he needs to be to shoot takedowns when Izzy's moving away from that long range, then I think Allen would probably beat Izzy. But without that kind of footwork, I think Izzy would defend the takedowns up against the fence, counter punches Allen's coming in, put the pressure on Allen eventually when the damage to the face from Izzy countering him or throwing out the jab, just the jab itself, busting up Brendan Allen, that gets him backing up. Adesanya puts the pressure and just picks him apart for a TKO. So I would go with Izzy, but I can see Brendan Allen winning. For Nasruddin Imavov now, this is a very different kind of fight. Who's a guy who will strike with Izzy. He does have wrestling. He has way better footwork than both Hermanson and Allen. He's way faster than both of them. I can see how Imavov wins, mixing up the striking and the grappling, because he does have the footwork to do so better than the other two. The only thing is he's not as much of a submission artist as Brendan Allen is or Jack Hermanson is. So I think that's the most competitive fight, whereas someone like Brendan Allen could just finish Adesanya out of nowhere. I can see how both Allen and Imavov beat Izzy, but I'd probably pick Izzy against both of them, as he is still looking very good. Then third question, would current Max Holloway versus current Dan Hooker be the closest thing we would get to prime Max Holloway versus prime Nate Diaz? And what would your prediction breakdown be for that matchup? If Hooker is similar, better than what prime Nate was, then what did that mean you think Hooker wins, since you mentioned before that prime Nate beats prime Holloway? In the lightweight division though, okay, I think the lightweight Maximus Holloway that we just saw beat Justin Gaethje beats any version of Nate Diaz. Featherweight Max Holloway, I think, loses to prime Nate Diaz because he has the kind of power to hurt Nate, to not just walk him down and stuff. And just for reference, prime Nate Diaz, I think, is the one that fought Michael Johnson. That is the best version of Nate Diaz I've ever seen. But I still think Maximus Holloway from UFC 300 is better than any version of Nate, would beat any version of Nate in a fight. But with that version of Holloway beat Dan Hooker? Absolutely. Hooker's boxing was never as good as prime Nate Diaz. That's the biggest thing. He's durable, he's tall, he's long, but he moves differently. He has different kind of footwork. He doesn't box the same way. He throws more kicks than Nate does. Nate is better in the clinch. Nate got so good in the clinch on distributing his weight against his opponent that allows him to trip him out or land punches or knees and stuff like that. He's also bigger. I think he is bigger than Dan Hooker as well. But yeah, I do think it would be the closest fight to a prime Holloway versus prime Nate, but I think prime Holloway would definitely beat current Dan Hooker. Then we go to Nano Peach. Hey Weasel, what's next for Izzy and Hooker? A lot of people enjoy Sean as champ, but honestly, I find his boxing crisp, but at the same time, his fighting style boring. Why do people hate so much on the drunken style of DDP? Yeah, Sean Strickland doesn't have the most exciting style. He's not getting knockouts and stuff like that, but his boxing defense is pretty fun to watch at times. He does land a lot of shots on his opponent, but even his style is kind of unorthodox in a way, especially with the way that he uses his legs to walk opponents down, feint with the knees and all that stuff, his push kicks. Dricus' drunken style is pretty fun to watch though. But what's next for Adesanya and Hooker? I think Adesanya should fight the winner of Brendan Allen versus Nasruddin Imavov, and Dan Hooker should fight Charles Oliveira. Your second question, where would Zabit fit in the 145-pound division? Let's say he fixes cardio issue after the surgery. So hypothetically, if Zabit had 5-round cardio, he could potentially become champion. If he had 5-round cardio, man, he'd be very, very hard to beat because he had excellent striking, great grappling, great submissions, 6'2" or 6'1", long reach, very athletic, fast, great footwork, could fight from both stances, had a decent chin, took shots from Kelvin Kattar, Kyle Bochniak, and a few other fighters that didn't hit as hard as Kelvin Kattar. I would say he would be at least top 3. When will the 115 belt be defended? Probably at the end of the year with one of the big cards, maybe when John Jones fights. I would say the Conor McGregor card, but Conor hasn't been having other champions on his cards, so maybe she would be on the John Jones card. Sean versus Conor, 155 or 170. Do you mean Sean O'Malley or Sean Strickland? Well, Conor beats Sean O'Malley. He's way too big. And Sean Strickland would beat Conor because he's way too big. And then can Kai Kara France chin check Pantoja, or do you think it'll be the same as the first fight? I don't think he knocks out Pantoja. I think Pantoja will take him to the ground and I'll grapple him, win by decision or a late submission. I don't think Pantoja's chin is cracked yet, so maybe Kai Kara France is the fighter to finally hurt Pantoja with one of those big overhands and hooks that he throws. Maybe an uppercut as Pantoja's trying to go for a takedown. That would actually be a very big shot that Kai can hit him with. But I would pick Pantoja to win. And as always, you are the second pound for pound after John Jones, of course, because if you are number 1, I'm crazy. Brother, you know it. John Jones, number 1 pound for pound in anything, not just MMA. If he was playing chess, can you imagine if Magnus Carlsen walked into a room with John Jones? You know who would come out that room? John Jones, with his new steroid collection. Then we go to Mike Griffith. Now that Du Plessis beat Adesanya, we're stuck with this champion that no one wants to see. The guy with the ugliest style in MMA history. Strickland, you better not mess this up. You better beat this guy. Du Plessis is absolutely not the guy we want to see champion. I'm not sure Khamzat would beat him either, because Khamzat doesn't have good head movement and Du Plessis has a lot of power. So it has to be you, Strickland. Is in your hands. Don't let us suffer from watching the ugliest, most boring style on the planet. We want to see dynamic striking. We want to see good looking style of fighting. Speaking of good style, where's Conor McGregor? Who's MVP fighting next? Yeah, I think Dricus is pretty fun. Even though his style is quote-unquote ugly and doesn't look as technical. But yeah, maybe Strickland beats Du Plessis in the rematch. I do agree Conor McGregor's style is very fun to watch. MVP is also pretty fun to watch in my opinion. The flashy snipers aren't as effective in the sport as they used to be, but I do love that kind of style as well. Then we go to Guy Won the Corner. Recently watched Anderson versus Izzy and saw old Anderson hold his own in there. How would a prime Anderson do against the current top 5 middleweights? Also, if DDP beats Strickland again and wins again against Alex at either 185 or 205? Is he in the middleweight GOAT conversation? That's interesting. So yeah, Anderson did very well against Adesanya, even way past his prime. I mean, prime Anderson is probably the best middleweight of all time. I used to think that Adesanya would always beat any version of Anderson because stylistically, he could kind of do what Anderson does, but better, with a longer range, more athletic, all that stuff, but that is not true. Anderson and Adesanya do not fight alike. Adesanya doesn't do certain things that Anderson was so good at, such as the counterpunching, especially with the straight punches, whereas Adesanya likes to counter from these wide angles with his hooks, whereas Anderson shot straight punches down the center as the opponent walked into them. Their footwork was very different. Anderson was better on the ground, he was better in the clinch, he was better defensively. He didn't have to use his reach in order to get away from the opponent's punches. His footwork was there, his just fundamental defense was just better than Adesanya's. Adesanya's main defense relies on his athleticism and his reach, and his ability to just sway away from punches from that long range, whereas Anderson didn't need to do that. Anderson's head movement alone, his ability to slightly move his head on these small angles and on the outside of punches and stuff like that was eons better than what Adesanya was able to do. I think prime Anderson Silva is probably the best middleweight of all time. So Anderson Silva versus Jared Cannonier, definitely have to go with Anderson in his prime. Cannonier was way too flat-footed. He's one of the easier opponents to react to feints, and Anderson had sniper-like precision to hurt the opponent from those openings. Nasruddin Imavov, that's a very competitive fight because Imavov can wrestle. His boxing is kind of inconsistent, so there are times where he'll be able to compete with Anderson, but then there are times where Anderson will counter him, and he is playing Anderson's game. He likes to fight from long range, look for the openings, blitz down, and that's the kind of stuff that Anderson loved to counter. So I'd probably go with Anderson Silva in a very good fight with Nasruddin Imavov. Robert Whittaker, another competitive fight. But the thing that I think would win the fight for Anderson Silva is that Whittaker doesn't have a great chin and he blitzes from such a long range. Again, he's walking right into Anderson's traps to get counterpunched. Israel Adesanya, again, I'm going to go with Anderson, but that's probably like a split decision or something like that. That's a very, very close fight. The main thing for Adesanya is the fact that his reach does give Anderson some problems. Sean Strickland. Strickland has a very good style to fight Anderson. Walk him down, defensively responsible, doesn't really give Anderson any openings to snipe. Could kind of go with the same game plan that he fought Israel Adesanya with, but the fight does change drastically if Anderson starts pressuring Strickland, right? If he becomes the power puncher in that fight, that's where I think Anderson would probably win the fight, which he has done before. Watch him fight Yushin Okami. There are moments where he fought Forrest Griffin and he showed his power punching capabilities of walking his opponent down for huge hooks and stuff like that. That's the way that he would have to beat Sean Strickland. But that's a very, very close fight. And then Dricus Du Plessis, I would never bet against Dricus again, so he will Looney Tunes his way into a win, even though Anderson should be able to counterpunch him very easily too. Like, he has the exact same style for Anderson to just knock out. He literally blitzed Adesanya the same way that Forrest Griffin blitzed Anderson Silva and got knocked out. But Dricus does have the grappling. He's very physically strong. Technically, Anderson should beat Dricus, but practically, Dricus probably wins in some very unorthodox blitzing, switching into takedowns, then submitting Anderson's, in some weird position kind of way. But great question, man. Let me go to the intent chief. The featured prelim of the November Madison Square Garden card has produced some big moments with up-and-coming fighters. Pereira debuted, Manny Moicano's speech, Johnny Walker versus Anderson, Urseg, not the feature prelim, but Habib versus Johnson, and his counter call-out. If you had to pick a fight to make an upcoming fighter a bigger star for the Madison Square Garden feature prelim in November, what would it be? Keep up the great work. Thank you so much, man. I would probably put in Bo Nickel. And if he were to just destroy his opponent in that fight, that would be the moment where he can finally go up against a ranked fighter afterward. So he can call out some fighter like maybe, I don't know, Marvin Vettori, Hamza Chimaev if he loses to Whittaker. Like, that would actually be the fight. If Bo Nickel fights in Madison Square Garden after Hamzat loses to Whittaker, hypothetically, of course, Bo Nickel just steamrolls his opponent and he calls a Hamza Chimaev of the featured prelim of one of the biggest pay-per-view cards of the year. That would be another one of those kind of moments like Habib calling out Conor or Moicano's speech or Pereira's debut, stuff like that. Now, if Hamza beats Whittaker, maybe he calls out Whittaker. No, that'd be way too big of a step up, right? The reason why the Hamza fight makes sense if Hamza loses to Whittaker is because Hamzat's ranked like number 9? He's not highly ranked like Whittaker is yet. So someone in the top 10, like lower in the top 10, lower in the top 15 would be a good first ranked fighter for Bo Nickel because he is just destroying his opponents very easily. What's another prospect that you could put on the feature prelim? So you could put Peyton Talbot and try to build up that rivalry or brew up the rivalry with Sean O'Malley or something like that. Oh, John Silva. John Silva would be very fun because he goes for the finish. He had an amazing fight against Drew Dober. He's crazy on the mic. I think the fans will love him. So even though he's not like the star that the UFC's trying to build like Bo Nickel is, right? Bo Nickel's the star. Like, he's the prospect that they're trying to bring up to become the next big superstar of the sport. I don't know if John Silva is that fighter, right? He doesn't speak English. He would have to be like another Charles Oliveira or Anderson Silva to become a star. So like insane performances with longevity. So it's a different kind of path for John Silva than it is for Bo Nickel. That's why I'm saying Bo Nickel would probably be the perfect featured prelim as his final fight before he goes into the rankings. And the perfect call out would be Khamzat if Khamzat loses to Whittaker. Great question, man. We're going to Toka Million. Is UFC's choice of giving title shots to popular fighters like Roundtree, Pena, and Miocic over more deserving fighters like Ankalaev, Harrison, and Aspinall better for business in the long run? No, I don't think so. Because they're not that popular where it helps them that much more to sell the pay-per-view or something. Right, Roundtree is more popular than Ankalaev, mainly because he is on Joe Rogan's podcast all the time, or multiple times. Pena is more popular than Harrison because she beat Amanda Nunes, and she talks a lot more, she's a lot more into the trash talking aspect of the sport. Whereas Harrison is more of an athlete. She will talk trash at times, but it's more of a competitive mindset than building up a fight. And then for Miocic, he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. He was a former champion with 3 title defenses, had a rivalry with Daniel Cormier. Aspinall is the new champion, but these 3 are not so popular like a Conor McGregor or something like that. Therefore, I do think that Ankalaev, Harrison, and Aspinall are better in the long run because they're going to be around a lot longer, or at least be successful longer than Roundtree, Pena, and Miocic. The only fighter that's part of the popular ones that you picked is Roundtree because he does have some potential to become an actual good fighter for a long time compared to Ankalaev. Ankalaev is already established as a top contender of the light heavyweight division, whereas Roundtree is on his way up with his best win being Anthony Smith. He's on a long win streak, very exciting and stuff. So he could become a top 5, top 3 fighter, but he's not there yet, right? The great thing about light heavyweight is you don't have to be well-rounded to be a top-ranked fighter. So Roundtree definitely has a good chance on actually being good compared to Pena and a very, very old Stipe Miocic, who seems like he's going to retire after the John Jones fight. Maybe. Then with the Isaac Jimenez, the GSP who fought Bisping versus Dricus. I would go with Dricus. He's way too big. What was GSP's walk-around weight when he fought Bisping? Wasn't it like not even 200 pounds? Or just around 200 pounds? And that was a very inflated GSP. He was like a balloon. So I would definitely pick Dricus, even though I think GSP is the better fighter. Technically and skillfully, he's just way too small. There's a reason why GSP fought Bisping and not Yoel Romero or Luke Rockhold or Chris Weidman or any of these other champions. He waited until Bisping was a champ, which he even said so. He said Bisping had the highest stock, and it was the perfect opportunity for him to fight the middleweight champion then. Not when Rockhold was champ, not when Weidman was champ. He didn't wait for Yoel Romero or, anyone like that. He waited for Bisping. In a nice way, he was kind of saying that Bisping was the easiest fight to become the middleweight champion. And I don't think he would ever fight Dricus. Like, even if he had the opportunity, if the fight was there, I think he would wait until there's an easier fighter to beat for the championship. Then we go to Felipe Araújo. How Dricus versus Pereira would go at 195 pounds. Okay, Pereira's the guy, right? Pereira would be the guy to catch Dricus with a left hook coming in while he's trying to blitz Pereira, right? Like, that would be the fighter in modern MMA that would beat Dricus there, but then again, Dricus will wrestle him and submit him within like 2 rounds. That's like a 50-50 fight. It just depends what Dricus does. Like, does he go for the takedown right away, or does he try to strike and blitz? If he blitzes, he probably gets knocked out. Dricus has a very good chin, but there is no such thing as a good chin when you're fighting Pereira. So Dricus would have to wrestle. He would have to get Pereira tired, kind of how Jan Blachowicz did, where then he can take some of the punches. But if he's blitzing before getting Pereira tired, he's getting knocked out. So 50-50 fight. But Pereira's takedown defense is getting better. If his takedown defense is so good that Dricus actually has a harder time taking him to the ground, then I would definitely go with Pereira. They go to Yoel Castro. Who are some fighters no one talks about having Dana White privilege? Sam Alvey. He was around for such a long time, even though he was on a very long losing streak. Juliana Pena. Why is she fighting for the championship? Her last win was in 2021 in December. Yeah, she beat Amanda Nunes, but the rematch was so one-sided, where it should be Killa Harrison fighting Raquel Pennington. I don't know any other fighter that has Dana White privilege that isn't like Michael Chandler, according to Tony, Conor McGregor, other superstars and stuff like that. But you say Dominick Cruz. Okay, interesting. Dominick Cruz is the first person who comes to mind for me. How many fighters can go over 2 years not fighting as the champion without getting stripped, come back with 1 win in 4 years and get a title shot, then lose his belt again, only to come back another 4 years later this time with 0 wins and gets another instant title shot. Forget that Conor privilege, I want that Cruz privilege. Okay, so this last part where he came back and fought Henry Cejudo, that is kind of wild. Okay, that one is kind of crazy. But the first comeback for a title shot after defeating Takeya Mizugaki, that part I do agree with. Because Dominick Cruz was a champion for a long time. He never lost the belt. Now, the 2 years thing, like, he never lost the belt. Now, being injured for 2 years and not fighting without getting stripped is kind of crazy when you look at Frank Mir. Frank Mir was like the standard back then who got stripped very quickly after a motorcycle accident. He came back and didn't get to fight for the championship. So, like, that's the one example, or that's the main example that people talk about when fighters get stripped and whether they should fight for the belt or not. But I can understand why Dominick Cruz fought for the belt and didn't get stripped. But then again, when Renan Barão is defending the belt, I think that's when the undisputed champion should get stripped. Now, the thing about getting a title shot after 4 years off of 1 win, he got to win. That's at least one thing that the fans want from a fighter who's coming back. Get one big win. He destroyed Takeya Mizugaki. He came back, fought for the belt, and beat TJ Dillashaw. So that part I do agree with. If he just came back and fought for the belt without any fight, that's a bit different. So yeah, I could definitely see that second title shot for Dominick Cruz being a bit different, but the first one after being Mizugaki, I can see why they gave him a title shot against TJ. Then we go to Sleepy Squirtle, who is the most overrated fighter of all time, probably like Ben Askren. He's a good fighter, he was a very good grappler, but he was like hyped up a lot before he came into the UFC, and then even his 1 win against Robbie Lawler, he almost got knocked out. So I probably say Ben Askren is the most overrated fighter. Then we go to Ultra Light J. Lucas Tracy left MMA YouTube. Tell us what's something you'd pursue if you weren't so focused on YouTube. I wish Lucas Tracy the best. I think he's going into like the fitness business and stuff like that, which is great for him. I hope him all the success. He probably will come back to do MMA content eventually. Maybe he succeeds, his business is thriving, and then he's bored one day. He's like, you know what? Let me make another video about MMA. What's going on in the next pay-per-view card or something like that. But what would be my career path if I retired from doing MMA videos? I would like to write books for martial arts. Some of the stuff that I've learned throughout the years, maybe just compile all that into one book about techniques and game plans and strategies and just like typical stuff. There'll definitely be a chapter on straight punches being looping punches and how that is a thing. Maybe help other YouTubers in learning how to edit and stuff like that. I don't know if that's an actual job that people have. I don't know if there's a job title for that, but that would be pretty cool to do as well. Help other YouTubers kind of have like a fundamental understanding on how to edit, how to put videos together. I think that would be awesome to also grow the MMA YouTube scene for more content creators. Then go to John Wan. Will Islam versus Arman resemble GSP versus Johnny Hendricks? A fight where grappling and striking will happen, or will it resemble Usman versus Colby 1 with pure striking? Yeah, we're definitely going to see both grappling and striking. I don't imagine Arman trying to just strike with Islam. He will lose that fight 99% of the time. And that 1% is him just letting some huge overhand exploding at Islam, and Islam just doesn't see it or something like that. Arman is 100% shooting for takedowns. It should be a competitive fight, but I don't think Arman beats Islam. I think their fights are always close, but I think Islam wins like 70% of the time, which I will talk about in the Night Matchups video. Then with a hazy bubble. Would you rather fight 1 Ngannou or 3 Mighty Mice? And would you rather let DDP smooch you or have John Jones hit on you? Love your channel, brother. Keep it up. Thank you so much, man. This is the greatest question of all time. Okay. I would fight 1 Ngannou. 3 Mighty Mice is kind of crazy, huh? Can you imagine trying to dodge 3 Mighty Mice throwing punches and kicks at you? You would get hit like 100 times per second. And would I rather let DDP smooch or John Jones hit on you, not actually hit? That's such a weird question. Okay. DDP smooch is a form of greeting and friendship, whereas John Jones hitting on you has different motives. Is he drunk? Because if he's drunk, then that's kind of crazy. But here's the thing. If you let DDP smooch, every single time you see him, you're going to have to let him smooch because you have accepted his friendship, his like way of greeting. So that's going to be the way of greeting every time you see him. Whereas John Jones hitting on you, he probably hit on you once, like it won't be all the time. And he's not physically touching you, so I guess I'll go with the John Jones thing. And it's much better to get hit on by the pound for pound #1 fighter of all time than Dumpty Plumpty Looney Tunes Dricus Du Plessis, right? Can you imagine if DDP and John Jones walked into a room? Actually, never mind. Neither of them will walk out the room. No, I'm kidding. Then we'll do Alan Combs. Where does DDP figure into the trash-talking GOAT conversation? He's a pretty respectful dude, but when his opponents start talking, he basically 10-7s them without fail. Thanks for the content. No, thank you so much, man. Yeah, DDP is definitely one of the best trash talkers. He has like a Dominick Cruz kind of style where he just isn't talking trash necessarily. He's just kind of bringing up the obvious in a straightforward kind of way. Stuff that his opponent has said. You know, whatever that is. He's not like making stuff up about certain fighters that he's fighting. And in that sense, I would say he's like top 3 greatest trash talkers in the sport. I still think Chael Sonnen is number 1. That Nogueira bus story is still the best thing I've ever heard in trash talking. Chael Sonnen versus Brazil was crazy. Conor McGregor, I would say, is like the second best. Then it's probably Dricus Du Plessis or Dominick Cruz. They're both very similar. Dominick Cruz is very like agitating though, like he really wants to irritate his opponent, whereas Dricus doesn't care about that. He just trash talks when they try to talk trash to him. Then with a Ron Burgundy, how do I improve my knowledge of MMA, like techniques? Know what I'm watching as a non-fighter. One of the best things to do is to go to a gym and train. You'll understand the fundamentals and then you build upon the fundamentals that you learn about. Everything is built upon the fundamentals. That's the number one thing to know when you're trying to expand your knowledge on techniques and stuff. So that's one way that you can learn a lot more, but there's also just watching a ton of fights and trying to look at fights maybe in slow motion can help understanding how techniques are thrown and how they're defended and stuff like that. You get to see patterns like, let's say a jab, right? A jab works on certain styles, certain stances, whether it's orthodox or southpaw, in different ways. And watching fights in slow motion, watching fights multiple times, watching sequences multiple times. Like there have been fights back in the day I used to watch. Sometimes it used to take me like 1 hour to watch a 15-minute fight because I used to go back and watch sequences multiple times, some sequences in slow motion, just to get a better understanding on fighting in general. Another great thing is to have friends that are interested in learning techniques. I grew up with relatives that were very interested in MMA and we used to talk about techniques all the time. Like when we watched Anderson Silva versus Vitor Belfort, that was the fight that made me a big fan of the sport, and I was analyzing Anderson Silva and Vitor's skills because that was the fight that we used to all debate on. Some of my relatives used to say, yo, Vitor's gonna destroy Anderson. Look what he did to Vanderlei Silva in the back in the day, how he knocked out Tank Abbott. Some of his big fights at light heavyweight, he was also physically bigger than Anderson. He fought at bigger weight classes. He's gonna be way too physical for Anderson. My other relatives will say Anderson's way too slick. He's too good of a counterpuncher. He's technically just way better than Vitor. So I used to go back and watch highlights. I used to watch fights of them, just research both fighters constantly because it became kind of like a competitive thing with friends. That also helps a lot too, you know? It's almost like when you're playing a video game and you're playing against your friends and you're trying to be better than them, or you're playing a basketball game, stuff like that. It's the same kind of thing that you could do with like techniques in MMA and determining who is the better fighter. I said Anderson Silva back then. I knew Anderson was going to knock Vitor out. I didn't know much about Vitor before that fight. I watched his highlights. I thought he was crazy with his blitzes and he was so fast with his hands, but nah, man, Anderson was way too good on the back foot. He was way too good from range. Vitor didn't really aggressively blitz down opponents until he found an opening in a counter-punching approach. So he would actually sit back a lot to look for his openings, but I knew that Anderson Silva would not give him that opening because he's not that aggressive himself. So they're going to be both fighting from range. Anderson has the range advantage. He's much more precise with his reach, and that's going to get Vitor caught. And that's exactly what happened in their fight. The other biggest debate that me and my relatives had was Chris Weidman versus Jacare Souza when Weidman was the champ. So they did fight each other years after Weidman lost the belt, but we had such a big debate that lasted for hours. I said that Jacare would beat Chris Weidman. I was so confident that Jacare would beat Chris Weidman. My other relatives are saying, no man, Weidman's way too good. But I would say, but Weidman would not want to wrestle with Jacare. So it'd be a stand-up fight. Weidman, yeah, technically he's better in some aspects of boxing. He's longer and all that stuff. But Jacare's pressure would ultimately beat Weidman, especially with the body shots. He's so much more powerful. And Weidman sometimes throws his punches very lazy. Years later, the fight finally happened and Jacare knocked Weidman out. Can you imagine? You're debating with your friends about a fight that could potentially happen, but it doesn't happen until like, 4 years later? Was it even 4 years? No, it was probably longer than that, right? When did Weidman fight Jacare? 2018. Yeah, so 4 years later. I think we were talking about Chris Weidman versus Jacare when Weidman fought Lyoto. So it was about 4 years. It was such a heated debate. I mean, out of all fights to have a heated debate with your friends about, Chris Weidman versus Jacare Souza was another debate we had. Conor versus Aldo, it wasn't like a big debate. We all kind of knew that Conor can win. I thought Aldo was going to win. Most of us actually thought Aldo was going to win, but it was one or two of my relatives said that Conor was going to knock him out. And man, were they happy about it when it happened. That was the one fight that just felt weird. You know, like when one of your favorites lose, and it just hits different. Like when Anderson lost to Weidman, Anderson was my favorite fighter. It was crazy. But Aldo losing to Conor, I was thinking about that fight for a week because Aldo was my other favorite fighter. And to see him get knocked out in 13 seconds after watching his entire UFC and some of his WEC career is so crazy, dude. After Aldo lost to Conor, I never had a favorite where I just like thought about it for a week after they lost. Even Tony Ferguson. Tony was the other one that it was sad, but nothing was like the Aldo loss. Nothing was like that. Imagine your favorite fighter is the one that got knocked out in 13 seconds in the highest profile fight of his career in front of millions of people who bought the pay-per-view and getting trash talked for months. I said it before, a lot of fans, they reach a point in their like fandom of the sport where their favorite fighters lose, their favorite fighter retires, and then they're kind of watching the sport as fighter A versus fighter B. You like some fighters more than others, but you don't really have a true like favorite like those other fighters were. Anyone who was a hardcore Renan Barão fan, you had the highest highs. He was the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world. He was the bantamweight champion. He beat Uriah Faber. He beat Michael McDonald. He was looking so good out there. Then he loses to TJ. It's like, okay, TJ's very good. He loses a rematch. It's like, okay, it's still TJ, right? He was like on a 34 unbeaten streak, which is one of the longest unbeaten streaks in MMA history, not just the UFC. Then he loses to TJ, which is like, okay, he gets a win against Mitch Gagnon. All right, he's back, fights TJ again, gets destroyed. Okay, TJ's good. Goes up to featherweight, loses to Jeremy Stephens. Like, okay, it was a good fight. Jeremy Stephens is a bigger guy. Understandable. Renan Barão fights Felipe Nova, and there's a very big difference with his body. It's like, okay, what's going on with Renan Barão? He fights Aljamain Sterling at 140 pounds, but now Renan Barão can't make weight. So they have to jump up the weight class from 135 to 140 because Renan Barão cannot cut down to 135 pounds. That was even what the commission said. It said it was dangerous for Renan Barão to cut down to 135, so Aljamain accepted 140. Renan Barão lost that fight. Then he is able to come down to 135, fight Brian Kelleher, much bigger step down in competition, loses that fight. Renan Barão is definitely not the same fighter anymore. Then he loses to Andre Ewell, he loses to Luke Sanders by knockout. He missed weight for both of those fights. Then he goes back up to featherweight, loses to Douglas Silva de Andrade, who's actually a pretty good fighter, gets cut from the UFC, then loses to some random in Kuwait at Farah Championship, Walter Zamora. It's like, yo, the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world, the bantamweight champion, one of the craziest unbeaten streaks you've ever seen in the sport, looked like he was the best fighter on the planet, eventually can't even win a fight in Kuwait against some random fighter. Like, Tony Ferguson is not that fallen from grace. Like, if you give Tony Ferguson some random fighter in some random MMA organization, he's probably beating that guy. And the craziest thing about Renan Barão was he wasn't even old. You know how old Renan Barão is right now? He's 37. His last loss in the UFC was in 2019. He was 32 years old. That's most fighters' prime. Renan Barão's prime was back in 2014, 10 years ago. His prime was 27 years old and declined after that because of the TJ Dillashaw fights. That was a bit of a tangent. So I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And if you did, make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.